The humiliation. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Confederation stretched across 3 kilometers of crystallized space, its walls transparent aluminum, allowing the gathered species to gaze upon the stars they collectively ruled. Ambassador Riley Martinez stood at the designated platform for lesser species. Her worn diplomatic uniform, a stark contrast to the bioluminescent robes and quantum-threaded garments of the established powers. She had practiced this speech for months, knowing it would likely be humanity's only chance to speak before the Assembly for another decade. The Corvan delegate, a massive creature with 4 arms and skin that shifted between metallic hues, gestured dismissively with one of his upper appendages. His voice boomed through the translation matrices, dripping with condescension that needed no interpretation. The humans seek full membership status. Tell me, Ambassador Martinez, how many star systems does your species control? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Riley kept her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. Earth and 12 colonies across 3 systems. Delegate Krex, our population has reached 15 billion, and our technological advancement over the past 50 years, since first contact, has been unprecedented among new member species. Laughter rippled through the assembly hall, a sound that came in dozens of different forms but carried the same meaning. The Altarian representative, whose species resembled giant crystalline spiders, clicked their mandibles in amusement. 12 colonies. The Corvan Empire controls 800 systems. The Altarian Collective spans half the galaxy's 3rd spiral arm. What could humanity possibly offer us that we don't already possess in abundance? Riley had expected this response, but it still stung. She activated her holographic display, showing Earth's contributions over the past 5 decades. Our medical advances have eliminated 3 diseases that plagued frontier colonies. Our agricultural techniques have increased food production on marginal worlds by 300%. Our music and art have enriched the cultural exchange programs. The display flickered through images of human achievements, each one seeming smaller and more insignificant in the vast hall. Delegate Krex rose to his full 3-meter height, his lower arms crossed while his upper ones gestured dramatically. Medical advances we could have developed ourselves if we bothered. Agriculture for planets we would never colonize. And art? He paused for effect, his skin shifting to a deep purple of disdain. The galaxy has produced art for millions of years. Before your species learned to control fire, you offer us trinkets and call them treasures. The formal vote was swift and merciless. Of the 400 member species, only 17 voted to grant humanity full membership status. Most of those were other minor species who understood what it meant to be relegated to the Assembly's margins. Riley stood in silence as the verdict was read. Humanity would remain a provisional member, restricted to their current systems, their military limited to system defense vessels, their trade subject to oversight by senior species as the Assembly. Dispersed, Delegate Krex approached Riley with what his species considered a friendly gesture, but looked more like a predator cornering prey. A word of advice, human. Accept your place in the order of things. A galaxy operates on scales your species cannot comprehend. We have warships that could crack your moon in half. We have weapons that could turn your sun into a supernova. Be grateful we allow you to exist at all. Riley met his 4 eyes without flinching. Gratitude is earned, delegate, not demanded. The Corvan's skin flashed red with anger, but Riley had already turned away, activating her quantum communicator. The message she sent to Earth was brief, but would change everything. Project Nightfall is authorized. They've made their position clear. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, in a facility that officially didn't exist, Dr. Yuki Tanaka received the message with grim satisfaction. She had been waiting 5 years for those words. Around her, the most brilliant minds humanity had ever produced worked in seamless coordination, their efforts hidden from the galaxy's prying sensors by the ocean above and quantum scramblers. That made the facility invisible to all known detection methods. The breakthrough had come 18 months ago, discovered almost by accident during routine experiments with gravitational lensing. Tanaka's team had been trying to develop better shielding against Corvin sensor sweeps when they noticed something unusual. Dark matter, the invisible substance that made up most of the universe's mass, wasn't just passive cosmic scaffolding. It responded to certain quantum frequencies in ways that defied conventional physics. "Status report," Tanaka called out to her team. Dr. James Okonkwo, the project's lead engineer, pulled up a holographic display of their prototype vessel. It looked less like a ship and more like a hole in space itself, its hull constructed from materials that existed partially outside normal dimensions. "The Wraith is ready for field testing. We've successfully completed 47 phase trials in the testing chamber. The dark matter resonance drive is stable, and the quantum anchoring system prevents the pilot from losing cohesion with our reality." The pilot in question, Captain Maria Santos, stood examining the ship through the observation window. She had been selected from thousands of candidates, not just for her flying skills, but for her unique neural patterns that allowed her to interface with the dark matter field without losing her sanity. The implants behind her ears glowed faintly. Blue, quantum processors that would link her consciousness directly to the ship's exotic systems. "The theory is sound," Tanaka explained to the gathered team. "By manipulating dark matter density around the vessel, we can create pockets of altered space-time. The ship doesn't move through space in the conventional sense. It exists in a state of quantum superposition, potentially present at multiple points simultaneously. Until the pilot collapses the wave function at their chosen destination." The implications were staggering. Faster than light travel without actually traveling. Shields that didn't block attacks, but simply existed in a different phase of reality, where the attacks couldn't reach them. Weapons that could bypass any defense by attacking from dimensions the enemy couldn't perceive. The first test flight was scheduled for that night, timed to coincide with a solar storm that would mask any unusual energy signatures. Captain Santos climbed into the Wraith's cockpit, feeling the ship's alien presence pressing against her consciousness through the neural link. It was like trying to think in colors that didn't exist, to navigate using senses humans hadn't evolved to possess. "Initialize dark matter resonance," she commanded. The ship responded not to her words, but to her intent, the boundary between thought and action blurring. Reality wavered around the Wraith as it began to phase shift, existing simultaneously in normal space and the dark matter realm. Through her enhanced perception, Santos could see the hidden architecture of the universe, the invisible currents of dark matter that connected all things like a cosmic web. She pushed the ship forward. Except forward wasn't the right word. She existed at her starting point, her destination, and every point in between, then chose where to collapse the quantum state. To the observers in the facility, the Wraith simply vanished and reappeared 10,000 kilometers away in less than a heartbeat. But Santos had experienced something far stranger. She had felt the ship exist in multiple states, had seen possible futures and pasts bleeding into the present, had touched the fundamental forces that held reality together. How was it? Tanaka asked when Santos emerged from the cockpit, her eyes unfocused as her brain struggled to process what she had experienced. "It was like being everywhere and nowhere," Santos replied slowly. "I could feel the galaxy's dark matter currents. I could sense every mass shadow, every gravitational well. The Corvins, the Altarians, all of them. They're blind to an entire layer of reality. They have no idea what's possible." Over the following weeks, Project Nightfall accelerated beyond all projections. 20 more Wraith-class vessels were constructed in secret facilities around Earth and its colonies. Pilots were trained using neural simulation. Their minds gradually adapted to thinking in the impossible geometries of dark matter space. Weapons were developed that could strike from dimensions enemies couldn't perceive. Shields that made ships functionally intangible to conventional attacks. Then came the provocation everyone had been expecting. The Corvan Empire, apparently deciding that humanity needed a reminder of its place, announced a protective blockade of Earth's outer colonies. They claimed it was for humanity's own safety, to prevent them from expanding into dangerous territory. In reality, it was a demonstration of power, a reminder that humanity existed at the pleasure of superior species. 40 Corvan battlecruisers, each one larger than any ship humanity had ever built, took position around the jump points leading to Earth's colonies. Their weapons powered up in a show of force, capable of vaporizing any human vessel that attempted to run the blockade. Delegate Krex himself commanded the flagship, broadcasting on all frequencies. This is for your own protection, humans. Accept our guidance, and no harm will come to you. Resist and learn why the Corvan Empire has never lost a war in 10,000 years. What Krex didn't know was that Earth had been preparing for exactly this moment. In hidden bases across human space, pilots climbed into ships that shouldn't exist, preparing to reveal that humanity had found something in the darkness between. Stars that would change the balance of power forever. Asterisk the revelation. First sign that something was wrong came from the Corvan early warning station at the edge of the blockade. Sensor operator Vex noticed it during a routine scan. Anomaly. So slight he almost dismissed it as background radiation. Space itself seemed to ripple in patterns that made no sense, as if reality was developing stress fractures. He reported it to his superior, who logged it as a spatial anomaly and continued with standard procedures. Within an hour, 3 Corvan patrol ships had vanished without a trace. There were no distress signals, no debris fields, no energy signatures indicating weapons fire. The ships simply ceased to exist between one sensor sweep and the next. Delegate Krex received the reports with growing unease. Ships didn't just disappear, especially not Corvan military vessels, equipped with the most advanced defensive systems. In known space, he ordered the fleet to maximum alert. All weapons charged, all shields at full power. On Earth, Admiral Sophia Thorne stood in the command center of Project Nightfall, watching feeds from 30 Wraith-class vessels positioned throughout the solar system and beyond. Her pilots were reporting something unprecedented. Through their dark matter perception, they could see the Corvan fleet clearly, but more importantly, they could see the fear beginning to spread through the enemy formation as ships started disappearing. Phase 2 is authorized, Thorne commanded. Show them what they're dealing with. Captain Santos, now commanding the lead Wraith designated Shadow 1, received the order with grim satisfaction. She reached out through the dark matter field, feeling her squadron around her like extensions of her own consciousness. Together, they began their approach to the Corvan blockade, existing in a state between real and unreal, visible and invisible. The Corvan flagship's bridge erupted in chaos as impossible sensor readings flooded their systems. Gravitational distortions appeared and vanished. Temperature readings showed patches of absolute zero in empty space, and the quantum foam itself seemed to be boiling with unnatural activity. Delegate Krex stood at his command station, his forearms working frantically to make sense of the data. Then Shadow 1 materialized directly in front of the Corvan flagship, close enough that Krex could see its impossible hull through the viewport. The ship seemed to be made of crystallized void, drinking in light rather than reflecting it. Parts of it flickered in and out of existence, as if it couldn't quite decide which dimension to inhabit. The sight of it triggered a primal fear in Krex's species. an instinctive terror of something that violated the fundamental rules of reality. Corvin Fleet. Admiral Thorne's voice broadcast across all channels, transmitted through the wraiths. Exotic communication systems. You are in violation of human sovereignty. You have 60 seconds to begin withdrawal, or we will demonstrate why Earth's children have learned to make weapons from the darkness itself. Krex's response was predictable. All ships open fire. Destroy that abomination. The space around? Shadow 1 erupted with enough firepower to crack a small moon. Plasma beams that could melt asteroids. Antimatter missiles that could vaporize cities. Graviton bombs that could create artificial black holes. It was a display of power that had ended countless conflicts before they began. None of it touched Shadow 1. The attacks passed through the ship as if it wasn't there, which in a very real sense, it wasn't. Captain Santos had phase-shifted the vessel into dark matter space, existing in the same location, but in a different layer of reality. To the Corvins, it looked like their weapons were shooting at a ghost. Then Shadow 1 returned fire. The weapon was unlike anything in the galactic arsenals. Instead of energy or projectiles, it fired concentrated dark matter distortions, holes in the fabric of spacetime itself. The first shot hit a Corvin destroyer, and the result defied comprehension. The ship didn't explode or break apart. Instead, it began to unravel at the quantum level, its atoms losing cohesion as the forces binding them together were disrupted. Within seconds, a warship that had taken decades to build simply ceased to exist. Its matter scattered across dimensions the Corvins couldn't even perceive. 29 more wraiths materialized around the Corvin fleet, each one a nightmare of impossible physics. They moved without acceleration, simply existing at one point and then another. They passed through Corvin shields like they weren't there, because from the wraith's dimensional perspective, they weren't. The dark matter weapons continued to fire, and Corvin ships continued to dissolve into quantum foam. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 3 minutes. In that time, the Corvin Empire lost 15 of its most advanced warships. To an enemy they couldn't touch, couldn't understand, and couldn't escape from. The remaining ships huddled together in a defensive formation that was utterly useless against an enemy that could attack from dimensions they couldn't perceive. Admiral Thorne's image appeared on every screen in the Corvin fleet, transmitted directly through their system's quantum processors by methods their scientists would spend years trying to understand. Delegate Krex, you came here to remind us of our place. Let me remind you of something instead. You see the universe in 3 dimensions, plus time. We've learned to see it as it truly is. 11 dimensions of space-time woven through infinite dark matter matrices. Your weapons, your ships, your entire understanding of physics. It's like watching someone try to fight shadows with a stick. The demonstration wasn't over. At Thorne's command, the wraiths began to reveal their full capabilities. One ship split into 12 copies of itself, each one equally real, a quantum superposition weaponized. Another began generating gravitational waves that played the Corvin. Hulls like musical instruments, finding resonance frequencies that threatened to shake them apart. A third projected dark matter fields that aged sections of enemy ships by thousands of years and seconds, metal crumbling to dust while the rest of the vessel remained untouched. On Earth, the Galactic Assembly was holding an emergency session. Representatives from every major power watched in horror as humanity demonstrated technology that shouldn't exist, that violated their understanding of what was possible. The Altarian delegate's crystalline form was vibrating with what his species considered terror. How did they develop this? Our scientists assured us dark matter manipulation was impossible. The Assembly's chief science advisor, an ancient being from one of the galaxy's first spacefaring species, spoke with a voice heavy with dread. We dismissed dark matter as cosmic background, useful for calculations, but impossible to interact with directly the humans. They must have approached it from an entirely different paradigm. While we perfected energy manipulation, they found a way to weaponize the void itself. Back at the blockade, Delegate Krex faced a choice that would define the future relationship between humanity and the galaxy. His fleet was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that existed partially outside reality. His weapons were useless, his shields meaningless. The mighty Corvan Empire, which had never lost a war, was being humiliated by a species they had dismissed as barely evolved primitive. Admiral Thorn, Krex transmitted, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. We request terms for withdrawal. The words tasted like poison to a species that had never retreated, never negotiated from weakness. But the alternative was the complete annihilation of his fleet by weapons that turned the laws of physics into suggestions. Terms? Thorn's voice carried a hard edge. Here are our terms. The blockade ends immediately. Earth and its colonies are recognized as sovereign territory, not to be entered without permission. Humanity is granted full membership in the Galactic Assembly, with all associated rights and privileges. And Delegate Krex, you will personally apologize to Ambassador Martinez for your species' treatment of humanity. The assembly hall fell silent. No one had ever forced the Corvan Empire to apologize for anything. They were one of the three supreme powers that essentially controlled galactic politics. But as they watched another Corvan ship dissolve into quantum nothing, they realized the balance of power had fundamentally shifted. Furthermore, Thorn continued, humanity will share the basic principles of dark matter manipulation with the Assembly, but only after a new charter is drafted that ensures equal treatment for all member species, regardless of their technological level or military power. The era of might making right ends today. Captain Santos watched through her dark matter perception as fear rippled through the Corvan fleet like a physical force. She could feel their confusion, their terror at facing something that violated everything they thought they knew about warfare. Part of her felt sympathy. Humanity had spent weeks adapting to the reality of dark matter technology. The Corvans were having it forced on them in minutes. The wider implications were already becoming clear across the galaxy. Every military doctrine was now obsolete. Every defensive system was useless against an enemy that could attack from dimensions you couldn't perceive. The hierarchies that had existed for millions of years, based on who had the biggest ships and strongest weapons, had crumbled in less than an hour. Species that had been oppressed for millennia were already sending messages to Earth, seeking alliance with the humans who had done the impossible. Minor species that had been forced to accept subordinate positions were realizing that, if humanity could develop such technology in secret, perhaps they could too. The established powers were scrambling to understand how their entire worldview had been so wrong. Delegate Krex's surrender came with a broken voice. We accept your terms, Admiral Thorn. The blockade is ended. WE acknowledge humanity's sovereignty and support their petition for full membership. The words were being broadcast across the galaxy, the mighty Corvan Empire bowing to a species they had dismissed as insects just hours before. But Thorn wasn't finished. One more thing, Delegate. You threatened to crack our moon and turn our sun into a supernova. You said we should be grateful you allow us to exist. Let me be clear. We could phase your entire fleet into dark matter space and leave you there, trapped between dimensions for eternity. We could unravel your homeworld at the quantum level. We could turn your stars into dark matter furnaces that would burn cold for 1 trillion years. But we won't. Not because we can't, but because, unlike you, we understand that true strength isn't shown through destruction, but through restraint. As the Corvan fleet began its withdrawal, their formations broken and their pride shattered, messages flooded in from across the galaxy. Some species offered alliance, others begged for mercy, and many simply wanted to understand how humanity had achieved the impossible. The Galactic Assembly called for an immediate constitutional convention to rewrite the fundamental laws of interstellar civilization. Ambassador Riley Martinez stood in the same assembly hall where she had been humiliated just weeks before. Now, every eye was on her with a mixture of fear, respect, and desperate curiosity. The Altarian delegate, who had mocked humanity's contributions, approached with what his species considered a gesture of submission. Ambassador, we misjudged your species. We saw your kindness as weakness, your desire for peace as inability. To wage war, we were wrong. Riley looked out at the assembled species, many of whom had laughed at humanity's offerings of art and medicine and agricultural advances. You weren't wrong about our desire for peace. You were wrong about why we desired it. We've seen what we're capable of when pushed to war. We've learned to weaponize forces that could unravel the galaxy itself. We choose peace not from weakness, but from wisdom. The vote for humanity's full membership was unanimous. No species dared vote against the humans who had turned dark matter into a weapon. But more importantly, the entire structure of galactic civilization began to change. The new charter that humanity insisted on established protections for developing species, restrictions on military interventions, and requirements for technological sharing that would prevent any single species from dominating others. Earth's dark matter fleet, now revealed to number over 100 vessels, took up positions throughout human space. But they also began appearing at trouble spots across the galaxy, intervening when stronger species tried to exploit weaker ones. The ships that had terrified the Corvan Empire became symbols of a new order, one where might no longer automatically made right. The transformation wasn't without resistance. Some species, particularly those that had built their entire identities on military superiority, struggled to accept the new reality. But when a coalition of former supreme powers attempted to develop their own dark matter technology and accidentally phased an entire moon out of existence, they realized humanity's warnings about the dangers were not exaggerations. Humanity established the Dark Matter Technology Institute, where selected scientists from other species could learn the basics of the new physics. But the full secrets, the techniques that allowed human pilots to navigate dark matter space without losing their sanity, remained closely guarded. It was leverage, certainly, but also responsibility. The power to unravel reality itself wasn't something to be shared lightly. Captain Santos, promoted to Admiral of the Dark Matter Fleet, often stood on the bridge of Shadow One and contemplated what humanity had become. They were no longer the newcomers begging for acceptance. They were the species that had looked into the void between stars and found a way to make it serve them. But with that power came a burden. They had to be better than those who had oppressed them, had to resist the temptation to become the very bullies they had defeated. The galaxy watched Earth with a mixture of fear and hope. Fear of what humanity could do with their impossible technology. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the species that had been dismissed as primitive might lead them into a better future. The dark matter warships patrolled the spaces between stars. No longer weapons of conquest, but guardians of a new age. The transformation was complete. Earth's children had taken the stage, and the galaxy would never be the same. Where once there had been hierarchies based on ancient power, now there was uncertainty and possibility. The darkness between stars, which had been empty and ignored for millions of years, now held the promise and threat of humanity's presence. And in the assembly hall where it had all began, a new motto was inscribed in languages from across the galaxy. True strength is not in the weapons we wield, but in the restraint we show in wielding them. It was a human phrase, from a species that had learned to make weapons from darkness itself, and chosen to use them to bring light. Asterisk.